September 12, 1683. Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, had been under siege for 2 months. Inside the city walls, soldiers and civilians were starving, ammunition was running low, and the defensive walls had been breached in multiple places. Outside, over 150,000 Ottoman troops surrounded the city, with siege mines ready to bring down the remaining fortifications. The Ottoman Empire, at the height of its power, was about to capture one of Europe's most important cities. If Vienna fell, all of Central Europe would lie open to Ottoman conquest. It seemed inevitable. The defenders were exhausted, outnumbered, and nearly out of time. Then, from the hills overlooking Vienna, a relief army appeared. At its center, 18,000 Polish cavalry, including 3,000 of history's most legendary warriors. The Winged Hussars. Led by King Jan III Sobieski himself, these armored lancers would launch what many historians consider the largest cavalry charge in history. What happened next changed the course of European history. The Ottoman siege was shattered, the empire was thrown into retreat, and the advance into Europe was permanently stopped. One battle, one charge. Everything changed. This is the story of the Battle of Vienna, how 18,000 Polish cavalry defended against one of history's greatest empires, and why this battle matters far more than most people realize. Let's get into it. To understand the stakes at Vienna, we need to understand just how powerful the Ottoman Empire was in 1683. The Ottoman Empire had been expanding for centuries. From its origins in Anatolia, it had grown to control vast territories across 3 continents. The Ottomans controlled the Balkans, most of Hungary, Greece, the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Constantinople, the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire, had fallen to the Ottomans in 1453 and become Istanbul, the Ottoman capital. This wasn't a declining power. This was an empire at its zenith. The Ottoman military was sophisticated, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. They had modern artillery, professional infantry known as janissaries, who were among the best-trained soldiers in the world, and vast numbers of cavalry, including elite Sipahi units. The Ottoman army that marched on Vienna in 1683 was commanded by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Sultan's chief minister and military commander. The force numbered somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 men. Sources vary, but even conservative estimates put it well over 100,000. This included janissaries, Sipahi cavalry, Tatar auxiliaries, artillery units, and contingents from vassal states. For context, this was one of the largest armies assembled in the 17th century. It was larger than most European nations could field, and it was marching straight for the heart of Europe. Vienna was the obvious target. As the capital of the Habsburg Empire and seat of the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, Vienna was politically crucial. It was also geographically critical. Controlling Vienna meant controlling the Danube River and the routes into southern Germany and Italy. If Vienna fell, there would be little to stop Ottoman expansion deeper into Europe. The Habsburg Empire, which controlled Austria and much of Central Europe, was the main Christian power blocking Ottoman expansion. The Ottomans and Habsburgs had been rivals for over a century, fighting numerous wars along their border. But by 1683, the Habsburgs were in trouble. They were fighting wars on multiple fronts, including against France in the west. They couldn't possibly defend Vienna alone against this massive Ottoman force. When news reached Vienna that the Ottoman army was approaching, Emperor Leopold I fled the city. He took the imperial court and treasury with him, leaving Vienna's defense to a garrison of about 11,000 soldiers and 5,000 civilian volunteers, commanded by Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg. These men would have to hold Vienna until help arrived, if help arrived at all. The siege began on July 14, 1683. Ottoman forces surrounded the city and began the methodical work of breaking through Vienna's defenses. They dug siege trenches, positioned artillery, and began undermining the walls with explosive mines. The defenders fought desperately, but everyone knew they couldn't hold out indefinitely. For 2 months, Vienna held out against overwhelming odds. The siege was brutal, and the conditions inside the city deteriorated rapidly. The Ottoman strategy was methodical and effective. Rather than attempting a costly direct assault on Vienna's strong fortifications, they focused on siege warfare. Ottoman engineers dug extensive trench systems that gradually approached the walls. They positioned heavy artillery that pounded the fortifications day and night. Most dangerously, they dug mines, tunnels under the walls filled with explosives that could bring down entire sections of fortification. The defenders tried to countermine, digging their own tunnels to intercept Ottoman mines before they could be detonated. There were underground battles in these claustrophobic tunnels, with soldiers fighting in darkness with pistols and knives. Some Ottoman mines successfully detonated, creating breaches in the walls that had to be desperately defended. Inside Vienna, conditions were grim. Food supplies dwindled, disease spread. The constant artillery bombardment meant no one was safe anywhere in the city. Soldiers and civilians alike were exhausted from constant combat and the psychological strain of knowing they were outnumbered more than 10 to 1. Count von Starhemberg, the garrison commander, proved to be an excellent defensive leader. He carefully managed his limited resources, inspired his men to keep fighting, and organized effective counterattacks whenever the Ottomans tried to exploit breaches in the walls. But by early September, the situation was desperate. The walls were crumbling, ammunition was nearly exhausted, and starvation was setting in. Vienna sent messengers pleading for relief. The question was, would help arrive in time, and would it be enough? When Vienna's plight became known across Europe, the response was mixed. France, though a Christian nation, was actually pleased. The Habsburgs were French rivals, and France had no interest in helping them. The Ottomans and French weren't formal allies, but they had common enemies. However, Pope Innocent V understood the existential threat. If Vienna fell, the Ottoman advance might not stop. He helped organize and fund a relief coalition. The main responders were the Holy Roman Empire's German states and, crucially, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The German states assembled forces under Charles V, Duke of Lorraine. These were good troops, but not numerous enough to face the Ottoman army alone. Various other German princes contributed contingents. In total, perhaps 20,000, 25,000 German and Austrian troops gathered. Then there was Poland. King Jan III Sobieski, one of the most accomplished military commanders of his era, responded to Vienna's call with enthusiasm. Sobieski was a veteran of numerous battles against Ottoman forces and Tatar raiders. He understood Ottoman tactics, and he knew how to defeat them. Sobieski mobilized the Polish army, which was built around one of the most formidable military forces in European history, the Winged Hussars. These heavy cavalry were unique to Poland and had a legendary reputation. They wore distinctive armor, carried long lances, and famously wore large wooden frames on their backs decorated with feathers, the wings that gave them their name. The purpose of these wings is still debated. Some say they made noise to frighten enemy horses, others say they were psychological warfare against infantry, and some suggest they were simply ceremonial prestige symbols. Regardless of the wings' purpose, there was no debate about the hussars' effectiveness in combat. They were shock cavalry trained to break enemy formations with devastating charges. Their lances were incredibly long, up to 20 feet, giving them tremendous reach. They were heavily armored, well-mounted, and trained to charge in tight formation at controlled speed, maintaining cohesion where other cavalry would scatter. Sobieski's Polish force included about 3,000 winged hussars as the elite corps, with another 15,000 or so lighter cavalry and supporting troops. This brought the total relief force to approximately 65,000, 70,000 men, a substantial army, but still outnumbered by the Ottoman besiegers. The relief force marched toward Vienna through late August and early September. Ottoman scouts reported their approach, but Kara Mustafa made a critical mistake. He underestimated the threat. He believed his forces were sufficient to simultaneously maintain the siege and defeat the relief army. He didn't withdraw from Vienna or consolidate his forces. This overconfidence would prove disastrous. On September 11, 1683, the relief army reached the heights overlooking Vienna. They could see the city below, surrounded by Ottoman siege works, with fires burning and walls breached. Time was running out. Vienna might fall within days or even hours if the Ottomans launched a major assault. Sobieski and the Allied commanders held a war council. The plan they developed was ambitious: a coordinated attack down from the heights, with infantry and artillery engaging Ottoman forces in the center and left, while the Polish cavalry, including the Hussars, would sweep around the Ottoman right flank through the Vienna woods. September 12th dawned. The battle began in the morning, with German and Austrian infantry advancing down the slopes. Ottoman forces, which had been focused on besieging Vienna, now had to turn and face a relief army attacking from high ground. The fighting was intense. Ottoman janissaries were excellent troops, and they fought fiercely. The battle raged through the morning and into the afternoon. Kara Mustafa committed forces from the siege lines to counter the attack, but this created confusion. The Ottoman army was now fighting in two directions, maintaining pressure on Vienna's garrison while trying to repel the relief force. The Ottoman positions near Vienna's walls became vulnerable as troops were pulled away to face the new threat. Inside Vienna, Count von Starhemberg heard the battle and ordered his garrison to launch sorties against the Ottoman siege works. The defenders attacked from inside the city, putting even more pressure on the Ottomans, who were now fighting on two fronts. Meanwhile, on the Ottoman right flank, Sobieski was moving into position. He had led his cavalry through the Vienna woods, a difficult maneuver through forested terrain. This took time and coordination, but it positioned his forces for a devastating flank attack. By early afternoon, the German and Austrian infantry had pushed the Ottoman center back, but were taking heavy casualties. The battle was finely balanced. This was when Sobieski made his move. Around 5 p.m. on September 12, 1683, King Jan III Sobieski led 18,000 Polish cavalry in a charge that would become legendary. The Polish cavalry emerged from the Vienna woods and formed up on the heights overlooking the Ottoman right flank. The Winged Hussars were in the front, with lighter cavalry formations behind and on the flanks. It was an enormous mass of horsemen, arranged in multiple waves. Sobieski, despite being 54 years old and personally commanding from the front, gave the order to advance. The charge began at a trot, maintaining formation and cohesion. This wasn't a wild gallop, but a controlled advance that would accelerate as it approached the enemy. Ottoman forces on the right flank saw the cavalry coming and tried to reposition to meet the threat. But the coordination was poor. Units that had been focused on the siege or on fighting the German infantry now had to rapidly redeploy. Artillery tried to fire on the approaching cavalry, but had limited time to adjust their positions and aim. As the Polish cavalry picked up speed, the ground literally shook. 18,000 horses charging in coordinated waves create a sound and sight that's hard to describe. Contemporary accounts talk about the thunder of hooves, the forest of lances, and the sheer terrifying spectacle of this massive cavalry force descending from the heights. The Winged Hussars in the front rank lowered their long lances. These weren't just weapons. At 18, 20 feet long, carried by armored men on heavy horses, charging at speed, they were like guided missiles of wood and steel. The impact force was devastating. The charge hit the Ottoman right flank like a hammer. The Ottomans had quality cavalry of their own. The Sipahi were excellent horsemen. But they weren't prepared for the coordinated shock of this massed charge. The front Ottoman lines simply shattered. The Hussars' lances broke formations, the follow-on waves exploited the gaps, and suddenly the entire Ottoman right flank was collapsing. The charge didn't stop. The Polish cavalry continued driving through Ottoman positions, rolling up the flank, creating chaos and panic. Ottoman troops, who had been besieging Vienna or fighting German infantry, now faced cavalry attacking from an unexpected direction. What made this charge so devastating wasn't just the impact. It was the exploitation. The Polish cavalry didn't just hit and withdraw. They drove deep into Ottoman positions, cutting supply lines, overrunning artillery positions, and creating total disorder. The Ottomans' numerical advantage became a liability as their own units got in each other's way, trying to respond. Within hours, the Ottoman army was in full retreat. The disciplined siege force had become a panicked mob. Soldiers abandoned equipment, artillery, supplies, anything that might slow them down. The goal was simply to escape the battlefield alive. The Battle of Vienna was a complete and decisive victory for the Christian coalition. The Ottoman siege was shattered, the army was routed, and Vienna was saved. The immediate casualties were significant but not catastrophic for the Ottomans in numerical terms. Perhaps 15,000 killed or captured in the battle itself. But the strategic impact was enormous. The Ottoman army had lost its artillery, its supply train, its siege equipment, and critically, its momentum and morale. The retreat turned into a rout as the demoralized army fled back through Hungary. The Ottomans abandoned their camp in such haste that the Christian forces captured incredible amounts of supplies and treasure. There was food, ammunition, hundreds of artillery pieces, thousands of tents, and the personal wealth of Ottoman commanders. The loot was so extensive that it became a diplomatic issue as various Allied commanders argued over how to divide it. Inside Vienna, the exhausted defenders could barely believe they'd been saved. The city had been on the verge of falling. Another few days and the walls would have been breached beyond hope of defense. Sobieski entered Vienna to a hero's welcome. He reportedly sent a message to the Pope, paraphrasing Julius Caesar, "Veni, vidi, Deus vincit." I came, I saw, God conquered. For the Ottoman Empire, Vienna, 1683 marked a turning point. Before Vienna, the Ottomans had been expanding into Europe. After Vienna, they were in retreat. Over the following decades, the Habsburgs and their allies pushed the Ottomans back, liberating Hungary and pushing Ottoman borders back to the Balkans. The tide of European-Ottoman conflict had permanently reversed. For Poland, the victory was celebrated, but the long-term benefits were limited. Sobieski had spent considerable resources to save Vienna, but Poland's own strategic situation remained difficult. The country faced pressure from Russia, Sweden, and eventually internal divisions that would lead to Poland's partition in the following century. Sobieski's great victory couldn't prevent Poland's eventual decline. For Europe, more broadly, Vienna 1683 became symbolic. It was seen as the moment Christian Europe definitively stopped Ottoman expansion. The narrative became simplified and somewhat mythologized. Brave Christian defenders against the Muslim horde, which obscures the complex political and military realities. But the strategic importance was real. Vienna's fall might have changed European history dramatically. The Winged Hussars who charged at Vienna were the culmination of a unique Polish military tradition. Let's understand what made them special. Polish hussars emerged in the 16th century and evolved into heavy shock cavalry, unlike anything else in Europe. While other nations were moving toward lighter cavalry or relying more on infantry and artillery, Poland doubled down on heavy cavalry built around the devastating lance charge. The hussars were not just soldiers, they were a military elite with strict standards. Recruitment was selective, training was extensive, and maintaining the equipment was expensive. A hussar's armor, weaponry, and horses represented significant investment. This was professional, aristocratic cavalry at its finest. Their tactical doctrine emphasized the coordinated charge. Unlike medieval knights who might charge individually or in small groups, hussars charged in formation, maintaining cohesion and mutual support. The front rank carried the long lances, the following ranks had shorter weapons, and they worked as an integrated shock force. The wings, those distinctive feathered frames, have fascinated historians for centuries. We're still not entirely certain of their exact purpose. The most common theories: acoustic warfare, the wings made noise that frightened enemy horses. Psychological impact, they made the hussars look larger and more intimidating. Anti-lasso defense, protecting against Tatar cavalry's lasso tactics. Unit identification, helping commanders see their formations in battle. Ceremonial prestige, simply looking magnificent. Likely it was a combination. The wings certainly made the hussars visually distinctive and psychologically imposing, which is worth something in warfare. What's undeniable is their combat effectiveness. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, Polish hussars defeated Swedish, Russian, Ottoman, and Tatar forces repeatedly. They won battles against numerically superior enemies. They broke infantry squares and cavalry formations. They developed a reputation for being nearly unstoppable in a charge. Vienna 1683 was their finest hour, the largest and most consequential cavalry charge they ever made, at exactly the moment when it mattered most. But it was also near the end of their era. Military technology was changing. Infantry firearms were improving. Artillery was becoming more mobile and effective. The age of cavalry dominance was ending. By the mid-18th century, hussars had evolved into lighter cavalry or been disbanded entirely. The last true winged hussar charges were in the early 1700s. Today, the winged hussars remain a powerful symbol of Polish military prowess and national identity. They appear in Polish culture, art, and national mythology. They represent a time when Poland was a major European power with a military force that could challenge empires. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 is often oversimplified. Polish cavalry charges in, defeats the Ottomans, saves Europe. That narrative isn't entirely wrong, but it misses important nuances. Yes, the Polish cavalry charge was decisive. Yes, Sobieski's leadership and the hussars' combat effectiveness were crucial. But the victory was also the result of a coalition effort. German and Austrian forces fought hard all day and tied down Ottoman forces. Vienna's garrison held out for 2 months under impossible conditions. The Pope helped organize and fund the relief effort. It was a combined achievement. The battle's significance is also sometimes exaggerated. It didn't save Western civilization or prevent the conquest of Europe. Such sweeping statements ignore the complex military and political realities of the time. But it was genuinely important. It stopped Ottoman expansion at a critical moment and initiated a reversal that would reshape European borders. For military history, Vienna demonstrates the enduring power of well-executed cavalry tactics, even in an age of gunpowder. The 18,000-strong Polish cavalry charge worked because of timing, terrain, coordination, and the tactical situation, not just because cavalry inherently defeats infantry or siege forces. The Battle of Vienna also shows how individual battles can have strategic consequences far beyond the immediate tactical outcome. The Ottoman Empire didn't collapse after Vienna, but it never again seriously threatened Central Europe. The psychological and political impact of the defeat resonated for decades. And finally, it's a reminder that history is made by real people making difficult decisions under impossible pressure. Count von Starhemberg holding Vienna for 2 months. Sobieski deciding to march to Vienna's relief. The ordinary soldiers who fought in the trenches, on the walls, and in that massive cavalry charge. These human decisions, made under extraordinary stress, shape the world we live in today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most dramatic cavalry charges, let me know in the comments what other lesser-known battles you'd like me to cover. And if you learned something new about the Battle of Vienna, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.